Mr. Speaker, the philosophy of the new National Party is and will always be is to govern for the benefit of all strata of the society. The well-off, those just able to meet the living commitments, those under the breadline and those that need a hand up, the elderly and the youth in the mix. Our governmental policies stand, Mr. Speaker, on the concept of the greater good for a greater number of people through engagement and social partnership. Mr. Speaker, over the years, we struggled through economic challenges. As Grenada operates in the global environment, where the rules are the same for the large or small economies. Any relaxation of the rules for small economies is a result of these countries demonstrating to the international community, controlled by the developed countries, that they have done or doing what is necessary to make the economies healthy. In other words, we are, as they say, when some of them cough, we catch pneumonia. Mr. Speaker, after a period of bloating the public service under both, and this is the point I want to make, under both the former government of GLP and the PRG, well known the PRG was a state-controlled system, so everybody become public servant, everybody on the government payroll, even private sector businesses acquired for government control. In some cases, had to be returned. Because of this, we reached almost 9,000 public servants in 1986 when government was, first NP government came in under Prime Minister Blaise. The international community, the World Bank, IMF, and the team, all friendly governments, US, Canada, and so on, listen, we will help you, but you have to change the way you're operating. We cannot go to our taxpayers and ask them to give you money if you continue with the size of the public service that cannot be justified in the context of the society and the economy that you have and resources available. So you know what? There's something called retrenchment was undertaken. So Speaker, if people think they get licks politically, that's the most licks I ever got in my life politically. Everywhere you turn, lash. You're throwing my husband out, you're throwing my friend out, you're throwing licks. Left, right, and center. But we stuck it. Stood there. So Speaker, because the retrenchment program went on, I didn't say that it was done perfectly because I had my own difficulty with it, but I was a part of a team. Fortunately, the United States and other friendly governments helped with the golden handshake as people were retrenched. They got payments. An atmosphere for people, Mr. Speaker, was created that people can transform into small businesses, Mr. Speaker. The Central Water Commission itself found itself in the same boat, and millions had to be borrowed to pay off retrenched workers, Mr. Speaker. But Mr. Speaker, I'm making this point to say, I see a trend in this government to start to bloat the public service again. If they believe that the international community would listen to their own words and not what is in the book, and not what is in fact the case, they have another lesson to come. Mr. Speaker, in the early 1990s, the National Democratic Congress government then sought to impose some form of structural adjustment to address the challenges that they face in Grenada, which was further aggravated by the collapse in world prices in 1991. People from the lower economic strata, like the estate workers, lost their jobs. Social programs were cut, and the marginalized, those between the haves and the have-nots, paid a painful price. history of the National Democratic Congress. When there are sacrifices to be made, it is balanced against the ordinary folks, Mr. Speaker. While those who can afford are given more, the poor must suffer. And we say we love them. We love them. Mr. Speaker, I will debunk this later on. Mr. Speaker, this situation manifested itself again with the world financial crisis in 2008 under the NDC administration. And in 2011, Mr. Speaker, they could not pay salaries. They could not pay salaries or buy essentials to keep the government running. No one would give the government a loan. The overdraft was exceeded. The administration resorted to selling assets to pay salaries and other current expenditures. I see in the document one way financing government with current expenditure is sale of assets. I'm waiting. Renlek? Oh boy. Mr. Speaker, even then, they sold the property that they did not even own. And I just bought some property that was not even government owned. So we found that out when we came in 2013. The youth programs, social programs, opportunities for more affordable housing and programs geared for improving the lives and livelihoods of the people were removed. Mr. Speaker, that was the last period of NDCP government. Mr. Speaker, it was said by the present Minister of Finance and Prime Minister that he made a lot of money in the Treasury. A lot of money in the Treasury, yes. But yet we mismanage, we do this, we do all the wrong thing, but you make a lot of money. Contradiction. Mr. Speaker, in 2014, the NNP administration undertook a self-imposed structural adjustment program in conjunction with the IMF. We ensured that no one was retrenched. The public service numbers were reduced, Mr. Speaker, from 8,000 to 6,300 through natural attrition. Mr. Speaker, and that number was the case when we left government in June 23rd, 2022. An agreement was reached with the international community and rules were mutually established and followed. A fiscal responsibility oversight committee was established under the purview of Parliament through an act of Parliament. This was a major step in facilitating fiscal resilience. Mr. Speaker, the present advisor to the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance was chairman of the Fiscal Responsibility Oversight Committee for several years. And he should know the rules. Therefore, when statements such as "I don't care about the IMF," when that is made, and he has to consider, it must be considered irresponsible. I would only assume, Mr. Speaker, that the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister may not have been listening to his advisor. Because if you check the record of that report, you will see several comments in the name of this advisor pointing out any problems that were existing and trying to urge us to correct course. So I wait to see Mr. Speaker, during this time, Grenada entered into a debt restructuring and is the first country in the region to include a hurricane clause. Several governments, including Barbados, is now following suit. Mr. Speaker, I note the announcement of the payment of debt to Libya and the notion that this has affected Grenada's ability to access funding. Nonsense. This is absolutely false. Mr. Speaker, there are 3 factions of government in Libya today. And we are being advised, Mr. Speaker, that you don't know who to pay. In fact, who you pay one, next thing here, 5 years from now, they're shooting up and saying, I don't know anything about this group, yet you pay. But we were left with a lot of money. So we're paying, we're just spending. Mr. Speaker. So this thing about monies that we owed to Libya caused us not to get. Mr. Speaker, that's the greatest laugh you can get. Mr. Speaker, because what happened? This so-called lots of money in the treasury was because we were being given support, because we performed well and did what we had to do. Because we didn't pay Libya, Algeria, Trinidad and Tobago. The governments of Trinidad and Tobago, Libya, and Algeria were very understanding. The IMF was satisfied with the rationale and understood. We worked with them, Mr. Speaker. We worked with them, Mr. Speaker. That's why, Mr. Speaker, this statement that the announcement made that the debt to Libya prevented us. So what? They were giving us money under false pretenses? Is that what the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, wants us to believe? I will hear about this government. Because I, Mr. Speaker, and not a boast, I worked for the IMF for 3 years while as a professor in Washington. So I know the thing, Mr. Speaker. It is well known, Mr. Speaker, therefore. We got $30 million, Mr. Speaker, for the digital government program in the same period that the IMF, and you can't get those monies unless the IMF and others say no difficulty. $16 million for loan for food security that the government is now continuing, Mr. Speaker, grant. 16 million more funds for COVID-19 stimulus program, and 10 million was received from Saudi Arabia grant when this government just got into office, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the monies that we are receiving, they were not loaned from a commercial banks. They were loans from IDA, the International Development Agency. And these loans, Mr. Speaker, 40 years loan, 10 years grace, 0.1% interest. Mr. Speaker, these are what you call almost free money. I used to teach some of my colleagues, I wouldn't be there when you have to start to pay. You're like 10 years grace. Just a joke, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that loan from Saudi Arabia, the Prime Minister reluctantly admitted that I had something to do with just me. Personally, I will take credit. Because, Mr. Speaker, no, this is not a joke. This is a simple fact. And I say this, Mr. Speaker. About 4 months before the elections, the government of Saudi Arabia called me and said, look, we wanted to host Expo 2030, and we need entire CARICOM support. And we are told that you are the longest serving member. We ask you to help us to get all the members on board. I started to work. Mr. Speaker, we got almost everyone, and there was one holdout. So I called my friend, Prime Minister Motley. I say, you have to talk to that colleague for me. He's not saying no, but he's not yet given. So when we are able to get, look, I called Sarabia, I said, listen, so all this hard work, what in it for Grenada? Well, we'll give you 5 million. I said, no, not all that hard work, and not so cheap. 10 million. 10 million. The National Democratic Congress got 10 million US dollars grant. And then even called me and said, thanks, keep. I'm still waiting, especially my friend on the other side, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister, he named Mitchell. Mitchell to Mitchell. So I'm waiting. Right, Mr. Speaker? So, Grenada was the first country in the region to introduce Ministry of Climate Resilience, Mr. Speaker, under the leadership of Minister Steele. His work, Mr. Speaker, in that space during that period was internationally recognized. To the point where today he holds the position of Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, I am embarrassed to hear my Prime Minister standing in Parliament and trying to denigrate the appointment of Simon Steele. This subtle attack, check your document. This subtle attack on the appointment of Simon Steele by the Minister of Finance was unfortunate. If I was then another government in office, I would give tremendous credit and praise Simon Steele for the work that he did until a subtle attack. Mr. Speaker, that is the kind of mindset. It's petty, thin-skinned, and it's full of ego. You just come. Take your time. The thing will wear out. I had it for 23 years. 23 years. There come a time sometimes we shouldn't have it. When leaks start to fly. Just take a little message from someone who's been there for a long time. It will wear out. All right. Mr. Speaker. In the process of Simon's leadership, this is what happened, Mr. Speaker. The Climate Resilient Water Sector Project, GCRU project, $125 million in grant financing was given to the country, Mr. Negotiated to the people of Grenada by the Green Climate Fund. It found its way, Mr. Speaker, in the transformational physical infrastructure. It found its way in the transformational physical infrastructure. This was a project that commenced in 2019 and was stated in the budget by the new National Party government in that year. The Breakwater project, such as Breakwater project, which is again a part of the work of the NNP government as listed under, it was again listed as if NEC did it. Transformative physical infrastructure project in this budget, taking credit for what not is yours. Intellectual dishonesty, they call it. Work on this project started in the town of St. Patrick's in 2018, and the first phase was completed. The study for phase 2 of this project was also concluded prior to this administration coming to office, as admitted by the Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, in addition, under the Global Environmental Facility, Mr. Speaker, know your history, through you to the rest. Mr. Speaker, in addition, under the Global Environmental Facility, Grenada is one of the 10 Caribbean countries participating in a $20.7 million project implemented jointly by the United Nations Environmental Program and United Nations Development Program. The Integrating Water, Land and Ecosystem Management in the Caribbean Developing States project provides an integrated approach to watershed and coastal area management, addressing the many challenges related to sustainable water and land management. I did not hear one single mention in the budget on that project. Maybe it's too good to talk about, and then people look good. Sad. The St. John's River Flood Mitigation Project, Mr. Speaker. Another project that supports Grenada's efforts in resilience that has suddenly become transformative physical infrastructure project for this government. They're taking credit under a big name, big word. Mr. Speaker, and my favorite, the Millennial Landslip Rehabilitation is now another project and adopted as transformative physical infrastructure project. Mr. Speaker, I heard it said by some uninformed persons on the government side who parading. That is their project. Sure, parading, in the heart of my constituency. Parading. I say, poor thing. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So, Mr. Speaker, they must remember that the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Prime Minister Cameron, lauding the efforts of good governments in Grenada and Jamaica, wanted to pay a visit to two countries in the region. He chose Grenada and Jamaica, Mr. Speaker. And he came here and spent a day and a half, Mr. Speaker. Another meeting with the cabinet then. And he then said to me he wanted a one-on-one with me. To be open with him about how I see Britain. And I gave him just what I thought. I told him Britain abandoned us after the colonial period. And I said to him, look at the parliament of this country was destroyed. 3 governments, leaders of Britain promised to do something, not a cent. Said the parliament which you gave us a system. Lying there. Promises again. Nothing was done. I told him it took the UAE and the government of Mexico to give us this parliament, Mr. Speaker. I say all thanks to these useful brothers and sisters, UAE and Mexico. Mr. Speaker, after giving him a mouthful, said to me, Prime Minister, this is why I'm here. I'm here because I'm aware of how the Caribbean feels, and therefore I wanted to be here to speak to you and Prime Minister Portia Simpson. And you will see a change. Mr. Speaker, before he left, he announced $30 million grant support. Take it. Mr. Speaker, for those who do not know the history, That is the history. This is 30 million, this so-called lot of money I met. That is part of it. That is one reason. But after, Mr. Speaker, we decided was the Western Main Road project would be the key one, because we know the danger. A lot of studies were done and notice how much danger slides could happen to people coming on the western side. So we decided Western Main Road, and granted time with the 2 areas studied, we got him to decide, well, let's spend this money on the Western Main Road. And what you know, Mr. Speaker? Holiday problem occurred. So we had to, when monies are given, CD, the money was in the Caribbean Development Bank, put there. And you know when monies are given by international organization of international governments, you have to go rigid, international and regional. All the projects must be done transparently. And therefore, this was done. The consultant was chosen because no one knew exactly why the slip occurred. So, the consultants from Italy was chosen, Mr. Speaker, early in 2019, and packing up to come to start their work. Bam, COVID-19, Italy locked down. Consultants could not come, and therefore, we had to go through the entire process of consultancy over. And therefore, best done from Trinidad and Tobago in the year one. That's how the project was delayed. That project, if COVID-19 did not happen, we would not have the problem, the headache, almost the stress you go through Montmorris and Jones Road to get back and through from St. George's. Mr. Speaker, all the discussions were held with the landowners. They are my friends, some of them are my family. Everything was done. Project signed, started. The project was started, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker. Behavior, little children. Yes. Behave. Yes. You're not in grandparents, you're not in the. Behave yourself now. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. These are all of my sons. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. I'm amazed. And they went trying to open the project, you know. Project was open already. Contractors start working, hired men, several young men from the areas. They wanted to be theirs. They transform it and talking absolute nonsense without understanding what they're saying. About how there's a slip in Brazil and they won't let the slip. What do you know about this? Are you a technician? Are you an engineer? What do you know? I'm a mathematician, I'm not an engineer, I would not go there. But you are there, mouth open, word jumping out. Stop that. This is a new game. You are now leadership. Act as a leader. Act as a leader. And you may succeed. You never know. Act as a leader. My friends. So, Mr. Speaker, I was talking about that Molyneux project. So, that project is now, they take almost 4 months. Almost 4 months. In preliminary discussions, it was said that if we work fast, we could do a temporary passage so that light vehicles can pass through that portion while we continue to work. Mr. Speaker, I'm telling you this. For me, and I hear it from busmen and from vehicle owners throughout, this is most stressful to pass that road. The people of Morris, they are hurting because it was never meant to be a major road. Bus, trucks, and their portions are difficult to pass. I have difficulty driving there. I dread going through that area. And had the government moved and have more conscience, that will not be the case today. It will not be. People first, not the games first. Games, Mr. Speaker. You can't do anything to keep Montreal. He's gone to the mountaintop. It's there. There's nothing you can do. You need to learn, Mr. Speaker. So I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, I'm praying for the day when that work will be done, enough work, that we can now not have to go through this place. Mr. Speaker, I thought it necessary to highlight a few of our resilience projects because the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister made a special effort to trivialize what was done. It would be good to understand what initiatives and support resilience that his government intends to initiate in 2023. I didn't hear. Quoted an NP project as is, call it a big name, transformation infrastructure project. All these projects have now been adopted under the umbrella of transformation by the same Prime Minister that claimed nothing has been done in Grenada since 1983. Amazing. The Messiah has arrived. Messiah. I always tell my colleagues, and they could bear me out, and for the members on the other side, I say to you this. As I said, I'm at the mountaintop, so I can talk. I say to you, as I said to my colleagues, the worst characteristic you can have in politics is arrogance, lacking humility. It is the most dangerous factor in your success. You could build all the roads. You could all do all great success stories, and you treat people with scant courtesy. Dumb you go in. I've seen it. That's a fact. Any one of us. But you see, I was there for 38 years, so that's why I can talk, Mr. Speaker. And I'm offering advice, and the most thing they can do is listen. But some little children, they don't listen. They for mama talk, they all answering. And they don't. Mr. Speaker, please, your father, talk to them for me, please. Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this is it, what we have to do, Mr. Speaker. So, with the new National Party's philosophy that guides the policy of the government, that we seek to create a healthy, educated, and productive nation. We place special emphasis on the marginalized, guided by the message in Matthew chapter 25, verse 40 of the New King James Version of the Bible, and I quote, "Ye have done it, ye who he have done it, to the least of my brethren, you have done it unto me," unquote. We strongly believe that we have a moral obligation to protect and support the vulnerable and marginalized among us. I said to an audience once, as Minister of Works, way back in the 1988, a meeting, a gentleman not sometime last year said me, I never forget that. I said to them, the meeting, talking to me about fixing roads, and I said to them, I'm here because that's my duty, and I have to do it because you're taxpayers. But I tell you, I go into another part of the country when I leave you, with another group of people. When I live there, I do yours, and I do them. But when I sleep, I have more satisfaction when I feel I went to a section of the country who were marginalized, who had no service, and they got it. That makes me want to continue in government. So while I do yours, I don't have the same feeling. I have an obligation, and I have to do it. And that's why I make the point a while ago. Mr. Speaker, as such, during the Structural Adjustment Program of 2014, social issues were addressed. The safety net programs for the vulnerable were strengthened. Employment opportunities were created through initiatives like the Small Business Fund, special projects, allowing construction work at community level, housing brigades, the Youth Biz program that provided an entrepreneurial hub for young people wanting to start a business, the debushing and farm labor projects, the Money and Empower programs, Project Fly, fostering level-headed youths opportunities, which is a one-year community-based training program targeting 25 at-risk youths in every community, and the Youth in Agriculture projects, just to name a few. While the Minister of Finance and his team had 10 years to come up with alternatives, because that was the time the NNP spent in government, is still reimagining some of the same programs. Mr. Speaker, the issue of pension is also a social issue, so permit me to comment on it at this time. I remember sitting at the Finance Committee when pension and clapping, pension. Mr. Speaker, I wish to be honest here, very much so, in this document. Yeah. One would admit that the NNP administration, if anyone serious, they would admit, the only party in government that confronted the issue of pension as a moral one is the New National Party. The only party, Mr. Speaker, and I am going to relate the facts. Who wants to listen, will listen. Mr. Speaker, there were 2 court judgments. I know it hurts, but if it hurts, let it be. It hurts. The first one was the case in the 2 court judgments that affected pensions to public workers. The first one was the case of Mistress Hamlin Armstrong, which was concluded in 2010, and the recent judgment of 2022. These are the 2 court judgments. Prior to those 2 judgments, Mr. Speaker, the Pension Disqualification Act was the law that governed Grenada, and the New National Party made efforts before the both decisions to address the issue of pensions to public officers. In 2003, Mr. Speaker, we introduced, check the records, it's there, we introduced a Special Pensions Act, number 6, which sought to provide pensions for workers who were employed prior to April 4th, 1983. This was a fact. Check your records. This act provided pensions to temporary teachers, never qualified before, daily paid workers, community health aides, student nurses, and people who served under the People's Revolutionary Government. That act. And they served as police officers and pension and prison officers. The system disqualified them. Mr. Speaker, special pensions were paid from the time of enactment of the law to date. Special pensions. So the word pension didn't start after June 23rd, 2022. Mr. Speaker, the Hamlin Armstrong judgment came in 2010, and the NDC administration, listen, the The NDC is now in office. In government in 2010, they made no attempt to settle Mrs. Armstrong's payment. None. Zero. That is what this present government adopted your name. The post in 2017 post the structural adjustment program, the NNP government approached the issue of pension restoration and reform and the basis of the ruling for Mrs. Armstrong in two parts, namely restoring pensions to all qualified public officers based on the Armstrong ruling and pension reform through engagements. Mrs. Armstrong and 56 other workers were affected by her judgment and pensions were paid accordingly. So pension, as if the word just came. During the pension reform engagement with the unions, consistent with the memorandum of understanding signed in 2018, that's the agreement we had with them, talks broke down and teachers and other public officers took to the streets and went to court, giving rise to the judgment of March 2022. Given that the matter was before the courts, retired workers were merely receiving the NIS and the government took the decision to pay the retired workers 70% of their last salary, consistent with the MOU signed with the union as an advance payment towards any result of the court. In other words, we said we will not wait on the court. We still will give them 70%, and if the court says more, the addition will be given, and they were all happy to receive it. Mr. Speaker, the New National Party's position on the issue has been and will always remain consistent. While we did not appeal and agreed to pay the pensions in principle, we felt it was necessary to establish a committee with the relevant expertise to review the matter, to engage in a discussion with the unions and a holistic way forward. That is practical and what we thought was reasonable. Mr. Speaker, the point I'm making, we will not say one thing in government and another thing in opposition to deceive people to get votes. The fact that this government is now speaking about pension reform is very interesting. It's interesting. Given that this government is now saying something different than the campaign promises. When the Prime Minister clearly indicated that if his party forms the government, he would pay the pension to current and future employees in the service, even if his government had to borrow to do so, without any mention of reform. Understanding that pensions are not merely retroactive payments, not a one-off. Mr. Speaker, in a national address I gave on April 26, 2022, I advised the nation that preliminary numbers show a worst case, Mr. Speaker. I don't play with numbers. Those who want to play with numbers, they can play with numbers. And I'm a student of that. I advised the nation that preliminary numbers show, and I was in discussion with the IMF and other consultants, and they promised more work to be done in clarifying that it will come up to over 465, and it could even be more than that. We said noises were made in all forms of them in the media when the Minister of Finance and Prime Minister said that the cost was only 60 million. Leaving the country with the impression that I told a lie. It is a lie that I lied. Mr. Speaker, I take my profession seriously. I don't lie on numbers. Some lawyers like to lie on numbers. But mathematicians do not lie on numbers. Because they are facts. That's one profession you can't play games where you get called out. Numbers are numbers. Those who pass a little thing in math, I don't know if some of you pass. They tell me some pass, some fail, I don't know. So, if you understand this, Mr. Speaker, I will not tell the one number. So I look at page 303 of the estimate of revenue and expenditure, and I note a projected pension to be spent at $151.5 million. No longer 60. 151.5 going forward. Moreover, in an interview on his 100 days in office, the Prime Minister advised that there are over 1,800 persons who are now qualified. That's the point I was making. And can immediately leave the public service, costing the state over $290 million. The Prime Minister like 290, you know. Even when you see 150, you see 290. So, the Minister will call you 150, they'll call you 290, you know. They'll call you. Oh boy. Mr. Speaker, not even, quoting the Prime Minister, you know. So if he didn't say it, he could say it, the document there. Not even considering the interest, there's interest to come, you know, 6%. That is legally due to these people. The numbers can reflect the worst case scenario, as indeed I have indicated. So add up the numbers and come to 4 something and go much higher than that. Managing a country is serious business, I would advise my colleagues. And one must contemplate the worst case scenario as the extreme position that must be evaluated and planned for appropriate action. Mr. Speaker, a lot of people were, in fact, angry, saying that I lied. Mr. Speaker, one thing I promise as Prime Minister, the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, not the Minister of Finance, not the Prime Minister more, is important, it's Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance. He's like the United States Treasury Secretary or the other committees that determine rates and so on in the United States. Anytime he or she opens their mouth, things tumble. If it's positive, you see the stock market shoots. People start, if the wrong statements are made. So when we make statements like this, it has enormous implication. It turns out incorrect information. A cabinet conclusion of $290,000 for Polish ambassador, 150 go in the Treasury, and 140 end up in a constituency, not the Prime Minister constituency, no. And a cabinet has been accused by the present Prime Minister of literally stealing $140,000, the whole cabinet. Every member of cabinet is tarnished. Not one person. But the cabinet took a decision for a conclusion of 290. Listen, I'm calling on the Prime Minister to show the nation the cabinet conclusion of 290. Because you can't do this. I passed through enough of this, you know. I passed through enough and I don't want any of my colleagues to go through this. It is just not fair. I remember being accused of taking $500,000 and walking around Europe like some stupidity, some clown. Walking around Europe, friends abroad calling me, people I taught with at the universities calling me and say, man, how you could get yourself in this? For me. I had to ask one person one day, I said, tell me something. I know you believe all politicians crooked, so I'm not going to ask if you believe are honest or not. Because there's a general perception of politicians. I said, do you believe I'm stupid? He said, no, you are not the smartest man. I said, you believe I'm going to take $500 in a briefcase that can't close with 2 police officers, go from 5 cities in Europe, give a man an appointment and go and collect the thing? Oh my God. Mr. Speaker, and there are tape They're going to show this, they're going to show that. Mr. Speaker, we cannot do that to people. We can't do this. We cannot do this. And I'm telling the other side, your time may come, you know. Be careful, your time may come. That somebody may accuse you wrongfully. And I will hear you bawling. That's why I say I'm at the mountaintop. I'm up there. I pass through it all. I say I'm like corn flying fish. I take everything. Me alone send a plane in government, take the money. Sell the plane. Man, it's what they say, you know. This little man, alone, so good, sell a plane, the whole cabinet don't know, and they can't touch him. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Prime Minister, be careful with his words. Because when this 290 thing came out, 3 days afterwards, Mr. Speaker, I was sitting by the fish market in St. George's, in my car, and a gentleman was passing, and he looked like a half-rasta. Them so-and-so, the thief, jail them, jail all of them. Mr. Speaker, I sit there and honestly I had to laugh through them. I can't say he was talking about us, but the fact that he was saying it and passing in the street, I talking loud. I say, Lord, I say my namesake doing that to us, man. No, Mitchell does not do that to Mitchell. We are much more decent than that. Watch your words, Prime Minister, to you, Mr. Speaker.